Okay, so how did Jack's boxing career start?
Well, you got to recognize that in the 1920s, things were very different than they are today. Um, Kids didn't always go to college. That was not always the goal. I'm not even sure Jack graduated high school. But he was a kid on the streets. He sold newspapers from time to time. And there were times that he had to defend himself. And apparently he was a good defender of himself and probably his brothers and sister, and ultimately decided to try his hand at prize fighting, which he did. He started out at the YMCA, I think it was around 1926, as an amateur, and then a trainer, a very well-known trainer at the time, Frankie Rice, met Jack and took him under his wing. And I think he trained Jack and managed him for the better part of his career, which lasted 12 years until 1938. And Jack turned pro probably sometime in 1926. I think his first fight was against a guy named Heine Buff, who he had knocked out in 10 rounds in 1926. And he just, kids did a lot of different things different than they do today, and prize fighting was one of them. There actually were a lot of Jewish prize fighters back then. That's not something you see very much of today. There may be a few around.
Do you know why Jews were so prevalent in boxing back then?
Well, again, it was a way to make a living. It was a way out of being poor. Not unlike other minorities today. I mean, they use basketball, some use prize fighting, football, other sports to get out of being poor. And Jack's family was poor. I think, if I remember correctly, there were 7 brothers and 1 sister. Their father died, I think, when he was in his mid-40s. His mother was very much opposed. His mother, Mary, was very much opposed to his becoming a prize fighter, and was extremely upset by it. But he prevailed, and he continued. He went on to be a fighter. Actually, he was only about 18 years of age when he got married to his wife, Bertie. She was 17, and Bertie really was very strict with him about training and about doing other things so that he was in shape to fight. So it worked out very well over that 12-year period. He got very well known in a lot of places, which helped him later on in the business world.
So to what extent did Bertie play a role in his boxing career?
I think that she, from what I can recall being told, she would get up with him early in the morning. She would go out with him, and I don't know. I don't know if she rode in a car or a bicycle, but when he would do road work, and in case you guys don't know, prize fighters run a lot, because a lot of fighting, just like with other sports, is with your legs, and he had to be in really good shape to go 10, 12, 15 rounds of boxing. And he worked out a tremendous amount, both in the gym and doing road work, jumping rope, and all kinds of things that fighters do to get in shape. And I think Bertie oversaw a lot of this, and she was strict with him. One of the things I remember she telling me is that when he was training for a fight, she would make him sleep in another room and would put a lock on the bedroom door so that he couldn't get in. And that's what these guys have to do.
Okay. So what venues did Jack fight at over his career? Like, where did he fight?
He fought a fair amount in Baltimore. There were a lot of really good fighters in Baltimore back then. I remember some of the names. I know the last fight he fought was in 1938, and I think it was in Baltimore. He beat a guy named Pete Galliano. Jack started as a featherweight and went up to the welterweight division. And for those who don't follow boxing, there's featherweight, lightweight, junior welterweight, and then welterweight. And Jack rose as he put on some weight over those years to be a welterweight. But he fought all over the world, actually. He had a lot of fights in Baltimore. He had a lot of fights in this country. Fought a number of times. He fought a few times in Madison Square Garden. And he fought in other cities like Philadelphia and other popular sports cities, fighting cities in the United States. Mostly in major type cities. One of the things that occurred, though, is he was so good, he actually beat in his career 6 world champions, but never while they were world champions. The world champions wouldn't give him a fight because he was too good, and they were afraid they'd lose to him. He had 165 career fights. He won 150 of them, and the other 15 were not all losses. A number of them were draws. He was never knocked off his feet in all 165 fights, and obviously he was not being knocked off his feet. He was never knocked out in all those fights. So, but he fought all over. One of the places he fought significantly was in the period of 1934 to 1935 on 2 separate trips. He went to Australia and beat the best they had there. One of the things that's interesting about Jack is he was known as a southpaw. That means he fought left-handed and not right-handed. If you know anything about boxing, when you fight right-handed, you lead with your left and you follow with the right, but he fought this way. He would lead with his right, and his left hand would be his knockout punch. And one of the reasons they didn't fight him is because it was a little unorthodox for a southpaw to be a southpaw fighter. But he actually offered to turn around and fight right-handed so he could get more fights. But the world champions at the time, one of whom was very famous, Barney Ross, who I was familiar with when I was a kid, they just wouldn't give him fights. They turned a deaf ear to him. So he never held a world championship, although he beat, as I said a few moments ago, 6 world champions.
Now, can you elaborate a little bit on why he couldn't get a championship fight?
It's too good. It was a very controlled sport. You know, there were a lot of people who thought that the mobsters controlled prize fighting, and probably some of that is true. And they just wouldn't listen to him. When he offered to fight Barney Ross for nothing. Barney Ross would have gotten a guarantee, which was a lot of money back there, then of $30,000, and Jack offered to fight for nothing, but Barney Ross, as I said, turned a deaf ear to him and wouldn't give him a fight.
So you said Jack's father died at a young age. To what extent was he like the breadwinner of the family?
He was among them. His brothers, I think he helped put his brother Sam through pharmacy school, and Sam later became a successful pharmacist. I think all of them contributed to the household by holding jobs like being newspaper boys and errand boys and just pickup jobs that they could get. So I think Jack also participated in bringing money home to his mother to help raise the 8 kids.
Now, can you explain why Jack went to Australia to fight?
Yeah, he couldn't get good fights here. I mean, he couldn't get meaningful fights here in the United States with any kinds of purses attached to them. So he was able to do that in Australia, but he wasn't able to do that in the United States. Again, people didn't want to fight him. I mean, somebody was quoted as saying that Jack may well have been the best southpaw left-handed fighter ever to come out of Baltimore in that time, and there's others who think he may have been the best southpaw fighter of all times back then. So that's why he went to Australia, to get fights and to win purses. And when he was in Australia, he won all of the fights he fought there except one in which he got a bad decision. He fought a former Australian champion, a guy by the name of Jack Carroll, who got a split decision over him. And then they fought to a draw in their second fight, and Jack Carroll wouldn't give him a third fight.
So how did his career come to an end?
Well, I think there's a limited amount of years that one can be a prize fighter, and Jack decided after 165 fights and after doing it for some 12 years that it was time to get out of that business. He went on to own a sporting goods store business called Standard Billiard Supply, in which they sold primarily bowling and pool or billiard supplies. He also at one time, and I can't remember the exact number, operated a number of pool rooms in Baltimore. May have been 4 or 40. Jordan seems to think it's 40. I didn't realize it was that many, but pool was a very popular game back then, and he operated a fair amount of pool rooms.
So what would you say Jack's legacy is in boxing?
Well, I think that Jack was probably, his legacy is recognized, by the way, in 2 fashions. There's a Maryland Sports Hall of Fame, and Jack was inducted into it in 1976. He's also in the Maryland Boxing Hall of Fame, so he was well known there. During his time, he was known as the Baltimore Buzzsaw, and I think that's because he usually cut up his opponents pretty well. He was probably one of the greatest fighters ever to come out of Baltimore. There are a couple others. whose names wouldn't mean anything to you. I happen to know them. There's a guy named Red Berman who actually fought Joe Louis once for the World's Heavyweight Championship. And there was a gentleman by the name of Harry Jeffra, who actually held 3 World's titles at different times, who came out of Baltimore. And Jack would be right up there with the 2 of them as probably the 3 greatest fighters ever to come out of Baltimore.
Did Jack's Judaism have any impact on his fighting career?
I don't know that it had an impact per se. If not through his whole career, through a lot of his career, he wore a Jewish star on his trunks. That was sort of made famous by a fighter by the name of Max Baer, who actually was a world's heavyweight champion at one time. And in one of his fights, he actually fought Joe Louis and lost to him. And he had a Jewish star on his trunks. But Jack, I don't know that being Jewish had a major impact. There were a lot of Jewish fighters back then.
So can you tell me about Jack's family life, or just his life after boxing?
Yeah, Jack and Bertie were married at a very young age. As I said, they were married. I believe he was 18, she was 17. They had 2 children, Nathan, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, and Marlene, and then they had, between the 2 of them, they had 5 grandchildren, and they were very, very close family life. Everybody very much got along well with everybody else, and they were very much into their family. Jack was very into his brothers and sister over the years, had a very warm relationship with them also.
Anything else you want to add?
No, I came into Jack's life in about 1961 when I first met him, and found him to be a pure gentleman, very nice, pleasant, humble, not gloating about his successes as a prize fighter, but very proud of his successes as a prize fighter. I wouldn't have wanted to tangle with him. I think I would have gotten knocked out very quickly. But he was a pure gentleman, and Bertie was a real lady, and sort of miss him. Very nice people.
Was Jack at all bitter about never getting a championship fight?
I never heard him complain about it. I think it bothered him that he never got a championship fight because he felt he could have won, and my guess is he would have won and been a world's champion. But I never, in the years that I knew him, which spanned probably something like 30 years, I never heard him complain about not having gotten a championship fight. He accepted it, and he knew in his heart of hearts how good he was.